know the big names in this year's most improved player race. Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Victor Wembanyama, among others. Well, the guy who'd have my vote right now wasn't even in the conversation as recently as a couple weeks ago. Amen Thompson. I know how some people feel about giving MIP to a sophomore who's supposed to get better. A quick look at Thompson's numbers also won't show any kind of drastic year-over-year increase. But the guy's impact on winning and on one of the league's most improved teams is undeniable. It should not be possible for a guy who can't shoot to dominate games in 2025 the way Thompson has lately. But he's an absolutely relentless athletic freak who does a little bit of everything, or rather a lot of everything. He's an all-defensive caliber stopper, an elite rebounder on both ends, and an incredibly high IQ player who knows his offensive role. Having said that, he is an improving offensive player who can hurt teams from floater range, as he did to the Celtics when he called game Monday night in Boston. In Houston's last 3 wins over the defending champion Celts and league-leading Cavs, Thompson's averaged 24 points on 60% shooting to go with 13 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, and a block in 40 minutes per game. We're witnessing the birth of a star. I don't know who your MIP pick is, but at 22 years old, Amen Thompson's the best all-around player on a second-place team playing at a 56-win pace. And with that, welcome to the Unfiltered Show from the Score Studio. My name is Joseph Casciaro. Joining me again for his sophomore season in the booth here, the Score's director, social, Scott Campsall.
What's up, Cash? How's it going, buddy? Thanks so much for having me back on. I'm glad I didn't tank the show the first time.
No, you definitely didn't. And also, so the truth is, I just saw you walking around wearing this incredible Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon ladder match WrestleMania tee. I don't know if you knew, I was a huge Shawn HBK fan growing up.
I did not know that.
To the point where Alex Wong, friend of the show, calls me HBK because of how much I love Shawn Michaels. So the fact is, I actually just saw Scott wandering around with that t-shirt and said, you got to be on the show today. Also, fun fact for the viewers, we were going to start this show talking about the Memphis Grizzlies. I was going to start the show with a monologue ranting about how great the Grizzlies are. It's what this Friday's episode of Unfiltered on Score's YouTube page will be on. And then what happened was Amen Thompson, I won't say single-handedly, Dylan Brooks was great. The Rockets are a great team, but Amen Thompson was the best player on the floor in the Rockets' win over the Celtics, hits the game winner. It's their 3rd straight win over Boston and Cleveland twice. And while all that's happening, the Grizzlies are getting drilled at MSG. Now, that doesn't disqualify the things I was going to say about the Grizzlies or the things I will say on Friday if you watch Unfiltered, but I felt I had to call an audible, and we had to start this show talking about Amen Thompson and the Rockets. Thoughts?
Great call, number one. I can right on board with that.
Chair, you know?
That is why you're the host, and I just show up occasionally. Yeah, man, I mean, undeniable. I think, number one, pretty interesting to have a guy overshadow Dylan Brooks hitting 10 threes in a game. So I think anytime you can do that, you got to be talked about off the top of the show. But yeah, unbelievable, man. And like, one of the points you drove home in your monologue is just like, guys not even scratching the surface offensively in terms of what he's capable of. Like, this dude is just so athletic, so good defensively, has such a knack for the ball, just kind of knows how to play basketball. And he's going to be, 22 this week?
He literally, depending on when you watch this, because I think his birthday is Wednesday, but he's 22. Like, he's about to turn, or he just turned 22.
Unbelievable, man. Also, a fact you just alerted me to, he's got an incredible middle name.
His middle name is Excellence. Him and Osar Thompson, the Pistons player, it's twin brother. They have the same middle name, and it's Excellence. But it's spelled all caps, XLNC.
Listen, if that's a fact I know when I'm going through my pre-draft scouting, like, that guy flies to the top of my list. Yeah. Like,
he should win Most Improved Player just because of that.
Oh, it should be on the back of his jersey. The fact that I'm just finding it out now is insane. But this guy is on another level for a team that is, making such a leap, and I think a very, headline-worthy team, in my opinion. I think these are the kinds of teams I always love, the teams that kind of make a jump. They made kind of a mini leap last year. They made a big leap this year, already being in second place. I think they are, honestly, right now, one of the league's most exciting teams. I don't think it's a stretch to say that.
No. And with respect to Thompson, there was not an ounce of hyperbole at the end of that monologue when I said I believe he is the best all-around player on this team. He's a year and a half into his career. He's 22. Şengün's great. Jalen Green, has been better lately. They've got other players. FVV, Fred VanVleet's a champion, a veteran, big impact on winning. But I genuinely believe Amen Thompson, a year and a half into his career, 22 years old, who's still like you said, hasn't scratched the surface on the offensive end, is already the best all-around player on a team on pace to win 56 games. I was saying, also friend of the show, our feature writer Joe Wolfon, texting with him last night, and I was saying, watching Amen Thompson gives me Sean Marion vibes.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, but like once in a while, I'll use that comp, and sometimes people almost will be underwhelmed because whatever they think of Marion, Sean Marion was like a great player who is probably a borderline Hall of Famer in his overall impact, his role on some really great teams. The fact that Amen Thompson is deserving of that comp and the play styles like remind me so much, because Marion, he had some good shooting years in those high, up-tempo Suns teams that just shot a lot, but coming into the league especially, like no one's looking at that guy as a shooter or an offensive player, and he just made it work because he did everything else.
That's such an interesting comparison, to give credit to Sean Marion. I think, you might look back and look at the numbers, and they certainly don't do him justice. Like, that's a team with, speaking of the kind of 7 seconds or less era, with almost no defensive players at all. And the fact that they were able to, they weren't, obviously they were outscoring teams, but he is a guy who, if you take out of that system, I don't think we're talking about that team
Agreed.
the same way.
No.
There's Steve Nash, but Sean Marion is right there in terms of importance. And I think you could certainly make that argument that Thompson is kind of, if you look at this Rockets roster, he is kind of the guy that kind of glues everything together. And I know glue guy is not a correct term for somebody like this who's as good as he is, but because of everything that he does, it kind of fills in all the holes of what the other guys don't do, which is, I think, clearly a big reason why the Rockets are winning games right now.
And our second place in the West right now, which brings me to the second half of this conversation. Want to talk a little bit about the team we were supposed to open the show with. Still worthy of praise, the Memphis Grizzlies. Just comparing the Rockets and the Grizzlies, it's honestly a really fun exercise because of how similar they are in a lot of ways. These kind of grimy, young teams. They don't play the exact same way, but they're these very young, grimy teams that are very much on the way up. Mm-hmm. And they're separated by, I want to make sure I get the numbers right here. They're separated by a game in the standings. They play Thursday night, depending on when you watch this, in a game that will decide who will be second place as of that point. The Rockets, 31-14, number 9 offense, number 4 defense, number 6 net rating, average age 24.8, according to Basketball Reference. Grizzlies, 31-16, number 5 offense, number 7 defense, number 4 net, average age 24.8. Exact same average age, separated by a game in the standings. Now, the Rockets have won all 3 matchups against the Grizzlies so far this season. They're going for the sweep Thursday night. But it does bring me to the question of, to you right now, who is the second best team in the West? Because these two teams are very clearly 2 or 3.
It's such a tough, it's a pick 'em for all the reasons that you stated. I think, you might think, I might go Grizzlies because to me, the Rockets now are kind of where the Grizzlies were a couple years ago, where they made that first big leap and they, I think finished second or third that one year for the first time where they kind of experienced that success. I think the average age thing is pretty interesting too, because I think it's really a tale of two cores, right? Like when you look at the Rockets, they built themselves in such a fascinating way. Like they drafted their young guys. You got Green, Şengün, and Thompson, obviously, and they are all 22.
Yeah.
And then you kind of filled it out with these veteran guys like Brooks and Fred VanVleet.
Yeah.
And then Memphis now, their kind of main guys, Triple J and John Morant are both already 25. So to me, they're a little bit more, I think the Rockets certainly have that potential to kind of wane as the season goes on. Like they're having that very much that early sort of growth spurt where you experience success for the first time. Whereas I think the Grizzlies have been there already.
Yeah.
I think, definitely more of kind of like a narrative-based, claim there, but I do think them being older and a little bit more experienced, Marcus Smart's out right now, but he'll be back presumably soon, and that adds another element to that team. And that's kind of the only reason why I would go Memphis, but both I think relatively young, relatively exciting teams. Yeah,
I'm with you in that. I wish we could debate it, but I do agree that I think for right now, for this year, even though Houston's had their number, is a game ahead in the standings, just beat Boston and Cleveland 3 times in 5 days. I would lean Memphis still. For that experience factor, I do think all things being equal, if you have every player available, I do still think John Morant's the best player between the two teams. Jaren Jackson Jr. is incredible. A defensive player of the year, a guy who's won a defensive player of the year, who's now like a 23-point per game scorer on 60% true shooting. Complete player. Desmond Bane's a better playmaker than he was before. And Bane and Jackson got better last year because they had to soak up so much of the offense in a lost season when they had all those injuries. They struggled at times, but it's paying dividends now. And Memphis also just, for those who aren't watching a lot of Grizzlies games, which a lot of non-Grizzlies fans probably aren't, you should watch them because they're very, this was one of the things I was going to talk about in the monologue I never got to say, but, a lot of people complain about, every team plays the same way. If you watch the Grizzlies, they do not play the same way. Ask Draymond Green, who has talked openly about how weird Memphis's offense is, but not in a bad way. Like they're not spamming you with pick and rolls the way most teams do. They're not doing all this dribble handoff stuff that most teams do. It's 5 guys operating on a string. The way you usually see teams operate defensively, right, where you're moving on a string, they're doing that on offense, and everyone's moving at the same time to find open space. They crash the offensive glass. They run like hell. Like they just want to run the ball down your throat at all time. It's super fun. They're first in pace. It's fun. And both teams, great on both ends. I do think Memphis has like a little more shot creation with Ja than Houston has right now. It's basically a pick 'em. I'd lean Memphis. But that does lead me to the last question for this segment, which is you talked about the experience factor for Memphis, but also how Houston's best guys are a little younger. Okay, we're both in agreement. We would, just by a hair, take the Grizzlies right now. Whose future would you rather have? Like, if you're if you're an owner, you can buy a franchise right now. Cool, it's one of those 2 teams, and you keep, you inherit everything they are right now. Who would you rather acquire?
To me, this is basically this is a head. You're essentially picking Thompson versus Ja Morant more or less. Yeah. Because I mean, without getting into the complicated aspects of the Grizzlies sooner are going to have to pay more guys more money, and that's going to kind of mess things up. I think if I'm Houston, I like that I have this core. I have Şengün, I have Thompson, who I think is going to be phenomenal, and I have Jalen Green, who I think is certainly on the fringes of that core. I think I pick Houston just based on the fact that they have built their team in such an interesting way where they drafted these guys and they have supplemented them with Van Fleet and Dylan Brooks. Steven Adams is kind of he's not playing a ton, but the veteran presence is there. I think, I had the fortune of being able to cover the NBA Cup and be around them for a few days. And that was a big thing that came up is just, I was able to ask Jalen Green, what's Fred Van Fleet's influence been like? And he's just the way that he calms the offensive down is so huge. So I think that these are guys that are going to learn from the guys they have in there. And, you can kind of interchange those extra places if you plug in those 3 guys. Yeah. So I like Houston just from the point of if this seems like a sustainable core that you could plug in other pieces around because they've already kind of proven that they've done that with Van Fleet and Dylan Brooks kind of going in there and making things work. I think that you have a template insofar as in the NBA a template exists. I think that I like where that core is and the sort of adaptability they might have in switching out some of those pieces.
No, I think that's a great point. I wish we could disagree. I wish you could be the Razor Ramon to my Shawn Michaels, but unfortunately we are in agreement.
We're both Shawn Michaels guys, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. I would, and I can't believe I'm saying this because if you would ask me that, maybe it's recency, it is recency bias, but still, I don't care. If you had asked me this a few weeks ago, I'm saying Memphis. Yeah. What I've seen from Thompson lately now has me leaning Houston in terms of which team has the brighter future because I genuinely, this guy is an undeniable star. And obviously Ja is too, and I love Jaren Jackson. But Houston has some extra years to play with because their guys are younger. The guy I'm saying is now their best all-around young player is in the 2nd year of his rookie scale contract. Şengün's still only 22. We could talk a little bit more about Jalen Green and what they should do with him later in the show for another segment. But they have more time to spare, and also all the picks they have. Memphis has plenty of draft capital. They have all their own picks, I believe, in the first round anyway. But Houston's got all the extra picks. Houston has one of the best collections of draft capital in the league. And when you add that to how good they are already and how young they are, the flexibility they have, the no state income tax in Texas, don't discount that going forward. When they have cap space and stuff, I'll give them the edge.
Yeah, I obviously I agree. It's pretty interesting. I think the other thing is just how many teams have we seen in a position like this that's also been it's this is where you want to be, but if you're the GM of this team, it's you're almost already in a position where you've got to start thinking about how we're going to maximize these guys. Yep. Because next thing you know, it's extensions. It's, Van Fleet's going to come up. He's going to have a pretty big expiring contract. That's another piece. You've got to you can't just hang on to all the picks too. Exactly. Which is there is, if there were an argument against Houston, it would simply just be like, you're going to have to make use of these assets. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on you probably sooner than there should be, given the age of the core, just because you're going to have to start making moves and maximizing this talent.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too. In an apron world now, you do have to not rush, but you can't just rely on time. You know what I mean? Like a linear progression. Oh, it'll happen over time, because with the aprons, with the luxury tax implications, like, man, if you end up ahead of schedule and have great players or good players on rookie scale deals, like, you really have to take advantage of that. You can't just be like, well, by the time they're on their second deals and they're all together, because they might not be all together by the time they're on their second deals, because you might not be able to afford them. Exactly. And again, we will talk later in the show about what they can do about that. But another thing I've often said is, sometimes your first chance ends up being your best chance and your last chance, and the Rockets might end up being a cautionary tale about that. Okay, a team whose last chance probably passed them by.
What a transition. This guy's a pro's pro.
Staying in the West, the Golden State Warriors. If we're talking about the Rockets and Grizzlies being, going this way on the ascent, ascending teams, the Warriors are very much on the opposite end of that. They are a descending, declining, fading dynasty. Well, the dynasty part of it's been over now for a bit, but this team's cooked, right? Like, and what I mean by that is, like, as we know them coming into the year, even with like the outside chance of like, well, if Steph's just healthy, like they've got a shot. I think that's done, and that's not a knock on Steph, but it's just, you look at this team, like, game under 500. They're a losing team more than halfway through the season. They're a game and a half or maybe 2 games now out of a play-in spot. You've got Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Steve Kerr all in their own way, essentially publicly telling the front office not to make a short-sighted move, because you read between the lines, they're basically saying, we're not good enough for you to even make a win-now trade. Like, it will not solve the problems here. Steph just had a scoreless second half on national TV. Like, Father Time has come, not necessarily for Steph, but for this organization, for this team, for this core. I can't be the only one who thinks this, right? Like, they're officially cooked.
Oof. The scoreless half hurt my heart. That was tough to watch. Man, the Warriors now are like, they're at the point where, like, when you're playing NBA 2K and you're playing the My GM or franchise mode, and you're like 10 years in, and all of a sudden you look around and like all of the awards are going to like the generic, like the generated drafted guys. You're like Tyrone Doncic just won MVP. What the hell?
Some guy named Excellence.
Yeah, you're like
won MIP.
Yeah, what is going on? And then you're like, well, I still have Steph and Draymond, and you look, and it's like when you started it, their ratings were 95 overall, and now they're just flat out not good enough to carry your team to a dependable playoff spot. Yeah. And like, listen, like, is this team, terrible? Like, no, they're not 13-2 good, right, but they're also not a game below 500 bad. Like, they just are, their margin is razor thin, and they've been ravaged by injuries. But to me, it's like, you look at this team and you look at their path forward. The most upsetting part is that if you look at their path forward to improve, you're going to have to trade. You basically have a core 4, and it's Draymond, Steph. Draymond, who's probably honestly not getting you that much in the trade market. It's Steph, who I just don't think you're trading. Yeah. And then you've got, Kuminga, and you've got Pacensky. And it's just like, what trade are you going to make that includes one of those guys that is going to make your team that much better?
No, exactly.
Like, there's just no path forward. So it's like, I understand Kerr and Draymond and Steph being like, well, like, we're not going to sell low on JK to get, it's even like some of the names they were throwing out in the offseason. It was like Paul George, which, like, whatever, who knows how that would have worked. Yeah. But like Markkanen, right? It's like, great young player, like, got a lot of skills that works with them, certainly fits into their system. But it's like, how much better are you with Markkanen than with, minus JK and whoever else you got to trade, right? Yeah. Like, that's the depressing part. There just, like, is no pathway forward.
You mentioned the 13-2 start. I saw in an ESPN story last week, the 2024-25 Warriors, now the first team ever to win 12 of their first 15 games and end up below 500 at any point in that same season. Just to show you, like, how quickly the bottom fell out on this team. They're just not good enough. It's, what's depressing too, watching this team? Like, you mentioned the scoreless second half. It's also depressing just watching how hard Steph has to work. Listen, in general, during, this dynasty, you can go back a decade, even go back 6, 7, even when they had Kevin Durant. obviously teams are still selling out to try to stop Steph Curry. He's still having to work his ass off to get open, but it's different now. Like the amount of energy he has to expend, the amount of effort he has to put in to just finding a sliver of space to be able to let it shoot, like to let it go, is unbelievable. And it's because there is not enough talent, secondary talent, like supporting cast around him to take the pressure off of him. And it's just, you know, he doesn't have the legs to do that 70 to 82 times a year and then do it for 2 months in the postseason. They need a lot of help. Help is not on the way. Their best player and their second best player and their coach are telling the front office, don't even try to get help on the way because it's not worth it. Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs, but they're cooked.
Yeah, that Lakers game was a tremendous bummer, I would say. Like, just, you know, watch it for that exact, like, it's like you took the words right out of my mouth. Just like watching this guy work so hard only for the Lakers to just be like, we're just going to let Andrew Wiggins shoot. We don't care.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, I was thinking about this the other day, because also he was in Toronto pretty recently.
Yep.
He had a halfway decent game, but like I asked Scotty afterwards, like, you know, what's it like trying to guard him? And he's like, we are bumping him on every play. We are chasing him down on every play. And it's just like, you could see him wear down as the game goes. And it's just like, that's just the reality. Now, you know, what I was thinking about the other day is just like, I think Steph still has, you know, he's in his mid-30s. I think he's 35 or 36. There is a window there where his career where he is still like a useful player. Like he still attracts the attention. Yep. His greatest, I mean, aside from the shooting, obviously, greatest shooter ever, but like that goes hand in hand with that. His other greatest skill is that he sucks the defense so far out. And I still think there's a world where you can use him in that way and it leads your team to success. Like I don't think, you know, he's done as a player. Like, I still think he's capable of great things, but it's a matter of who he plays with. Yeah. And now we're getting into the uncomfortable decision of where it's like, do you let Steph go have this experience somewhere else, or are we just going to run out the clock on Steph? And I find this one to be a particularly big bummer just because like to me Steph is like that guy of that last era, like obviously LeBron too, but just like personal, like, you know, we covered him in the finals here, you've covered him in the finals in Cleveland, I covered them when they came back and won that finals in Boston. It's just like I feel like such a connection to Steph. And it's just like, it's a real, you know, maybe it's a personal thing for me where I'm like, oh, wow, I'm getting quite old now. Because I've watched this whole thing come and go.
I can no longer carry a team to a championship.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in here just riding your coattails like, you know, like I'm Mike Bibby on the Miami Heat, you know? Like,
you get a ring out of it. But last point, because you mentioned when they were in Toronto recently and Scotty was talking about the amount of physicality the Raptors and other teams will use just to get Steph uncomfortable in games. That same night, Raptors head coach Darko Rajakovic said, was it to your question? Or,
no, I think we shout out Aaron Rose. I think Aaron Rose asked that question.
Yeah, and you know, about the challenge of coaching against Steph and stuff, and Darko joked that he can't wait for Steph to retire. He's going to get drunk once Steph retires. Well, Steve Kerr probably getting drunk watching and having to coach his own team.
Brutal, man.
They're done, man.
And that's such a hilarious example, not to extend this bit longer than it needs to go, because the other press conference with Steve Kerr was it was the opposite of that. Like Darko was cracking jokes and Steve Kerr looked like he was like, the world is over. We are screwed. Yeah. This is bad, you know?
And it very much is from a basketball perspective. You know, we'll have some perspective, but from a basketball perspective, it is over.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap up the show with some trade proposals. Put our GM hats on. Trade deadline, again, depending on when you watch this, from when we're filming it, trade deadline's 9 days away. We will have one more show before the deadline, but by then, a couple of moves might have already happened. Mm-hmm. So I thought it would be fun to come up with one trade each, almost like a trade deadline wish list, where if we could just have our way, forget whether the teams would actually do it or not, but like if we could have our way, we would want to see these deals done before the deadline. So I'll let you go first.
Ooh.
What is your dream 2025 deadline deal?
Okay, so a little disclaimer here in that, I didn't go I want to see LeBron play for the Warriors.
Of course,
I didn't go that crazy. It was still within the realm of possibility. But Lakers related still. I thought looking at this Lakers team, let's get the trade out top and then we'll kind of break it down there. So I would like to see the Lakers bring home Brandon Ingram from the Pelicans.
I like that. I like it because no one else has talked about that. It's different.
Yeah, I thought, I was thinking, what could we do with the Lakers here that kind of
like
makes
it.
sense, but also would, expand their window. Obviously they'd have to send out probably a package. We're thinking, Rui Hachimura, Gabe Vincent, and Jared Vanderbilt to make the salaries work. And then obviously there's going to be draft equity. I think they've got a 2029 first or a 2031 first.
Yeah, they have those two to trade, and there's some swaps they can
Some
deal.
swaps, yeah. So we'll, include that in there.
Couple picks at least, because I know the three guys you've got going to New Orleans all have at least 1 year on their deal as well. So for New Orleans to take them and get rid of Ingram, Lakers probably giving them a couple picks.
It makes sense. Yeah, like I think, to get the New Orleans part of that out of the way, I think the writing's on the wall there. Yeah. I don't know how much leverage they have, so I could see this being a scenario where it's
going to be a free
like,
agent in a few months.
Exactly. We'll take what we can get because we're not extending this guy. You get Roy, who's shooting 41% from three this season, I think is finding his place a little bit, and there's potential to flip him for additional assets. But I think if you get a first-round pick and a swap in this deal, I think the Pelicans have to think about it.
Yep.
From a Lakers perspective, if I'm them, I'm looking at the standings, I'm looking at the team I have, and I'm pretty happy with how things have gone this year, honestly. Like, I think, where they're at now seems to kind of be in and around where you'd expect them to be. And I'm thinking, how can I maximize this window with LeBron without having to blow up my core, i.e., like give up Austin Reeves, basically. So if I get Ingram, that's a guy who, ultimately we're looking towards the playoffs when the offense is slowed down and it's half court. You get another creator in there, because how many years in a row have we seen the Lakers get to the playoffs and it's old man LeBron trying to make all the offense work, and it's just not going to happen. Yep. You get an all-star, borderline all-star level talented guy, I think averaging 27, 5, and 5 before his injury, or 26, 5, and 5. He's going to create offense for those other guys. And yes, you might lose a little shooting with Rui having the season he's having, but, Ingram's no slouch either. He's shooting 37% from three on, more attempts, but also the, spots he's going to create for, Finney Smith, who's a guy they went out and got for that same reason, to play defense and hit threes in the playoffs. Max Christie is emerging a little bit as a guy that's getting some run. So I think if I'm the Lakers and I can add a borderline all-star talent without kind of blowing things up, I think that's a home run for them.
Yeah, and I like the aspect too, like Ingram returning,
bring him home,
the place where he had unfinished business because he was included in the deal that brought Anthony Davis to LA, which got them their title. Ingram wasn't there for that. But I think, listen, if Brandon Ingram's your third guy on offense, that's perfect. Yeah. If Brandon Ingram and Austin Reeves are your secondary creators, that's perfect. With LeBron and AD as the pillars, JJ's shown some stuff coaching, like their depth would suffer a bit, and it would be a risk, obviously, but I think this would give them a chance to, I wouldn't pick them to win it all, but right now, I don't think they have even a chance to compete for a title. They make that deal, I would at least give them a puncher's chance, and if you have LeBron at this stage of his career, that's all you can ask for. From New Orleans' perspective, I'm not convinced they take it, but to your point, Brandon Ingram's a free agent in a few months. If it's like, lose him for nothing, or take on some short-term salary while getting a couple first-rounders out of it, they have to think about that.
I do think they're in that realm now of, like, let's maximize our capital and kind of rethink. Like, I think they built a team that, looked pretty decent, and I think, honestly, I felt pretty good about. And it's not worked out the way they want. They're going to have to make a decision on Zion, too. I think you're at the point where you're just, like, hoarding assets.
Yeah, I agree.
Because they've got enough good young guys like Herb Jones and Trey Murphy to, like, we could refigure this thing in a short-term turnaround and be halfway decent.
Especially if you have Flag or Harper next year.
That's exactly right, yeah. And then on the Lakers side of things, like, everybody right now is kind of playing for second place. We think OKC's running away with it, so why not go for it? There are 5 or 6 teams in there. One team I'm sure you're going to bring up that make a move. Let's see what happens. And like LeBron's, we just talked about what happened with Steph. That's coming for LeBron sooner or later. So like, I'm always been a guy that thinks if you've got a generational talent, you maximize that regardless. 100%. So that's kind of what that made sense.
100%. Okay, we started
Let's
the show.
Yours.
We started the show talking about Houston. We're going to end the show talking about Houston because as we were talking at the end of that discussion, I'm a firm believer that, like, you can't just rest on your laurels when you're a young team that's ahead of schedule because you're ahead of schedule. And you think, well, we've got years to figure this out. Yeah, you don't want to make a panic trade. Like, you still want to be prudent. You don't want to get impatient. But you also have to, strike when the iron's hot. And you are a second-place team right now on pace for 56 wins that, you have one glaring need, glaring flaw, and that is they don't have a true like shot creator, and they don't have enough shooting in general. If you watch my monologue a couple weeks ago, you'll know that Zach LaVine is having one of the great underrated scoring and shooting seasons we've ever seen. He is still undeniably one of the league's best scorers, pure scorers, 3-level scorers, incredible shooter on high volume, can create for himself. Secondary playmaking is there. I'm of the opinion, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree because I know there are a lot of Jalen Green stands out there, like bag in his bag Twitter all over Jalen Green, and he's been better the last month or so. He's been more efficient. I'm not trying to be a hater, but it's just you go by skill set. I don't think Jalen Green's ever going to be the consistently efficient scorer or shooter Zach LaVine is. I'm of the mind, if you replace Jalen Green with Zach LaVine right now, the Houston Rockets can legitimately compete for and maybe win a championship. Like, that's how good I think they are defensively, depth-wise, like all that stuff around the edges. The problem is Jalen Green has what we call a poison pill contract for trade purposes because he's already signed his extension, which kicks in next year, but he's currently still on his rookie scale contract. Essentially, the way it works is Jalen Green's salary from an outgoing perspective is considered $12.5 million. But you have to take the average of all the years remaining on his contract, and that becomes what's considered his incoming salary for the team acquiring him. That's $29.5 million. First apron teams can't take back more than they send out, which means any first apron team or any team that would become a first apron team upon acquiring Jalen Green would have to send out at least $29.5 million in it. So that's why it makes it very complicated to trade him right now. You could trade him in the offseason for Zach LaVine pretty much straight up. And so because of that, some people might be like, listen, you can trade Fred VanVleet basically straight up for Zach LaVine right now. Fred's a pending free agent. If the Rockets don't want to bring him back, do that. My thing with that is if the whole point of making this trade is because you're trying to win and win right now, Fred VanVleet's a minutes and games winner. The guy wins. I don't care what his shooting percentage is. He wins. You don't move him while making a deal to try to win a championship. Okay, got all that out of the way. So the way the deal ends up working, because I had to move some money around and I had to just include a bunch of expiring guys in the deal, it ends up Zach LaVine and Chris Duarte to Houston for Jalen Green, Steven Adams, Jeff Green, Jayshawn Tate. That works money-wise. Sure. In terms of like pure rotation guys, you're replacing Jalen Green with Zach LaVine, like I said. I think a lot of Houston fans, Jalen Green stands, don't want to hear that. You make that move, your team can win a championship this year.
That's a lot to digest there, Cash. I'm not going to lie to you, buddy. But let's remove the H&R Block aspect of that and just go straight basketball. I love it for the reason that you don't normally see this kind of trade, you know? Like, I love it for the same reason that people were like, ooh, Houston is maybe a low-key Jimmy Butler spot, you know? To me, it's like that kind of trade. And I think it certainly hinges on your long-term expectations for what Jalen Green is going to be, obviously. But I think to kind of our point that we were talking about earlier, it's like if you are Houston and you're like, hey, I'm pretty confident with all these picks I've got and this young team I've got that I'm going to be able to lure people here and that's not going to be an issue for us. No state tax. Then like, and Jalen Green, I don't really, I don't feel good about this contract we signed him to. Like, that's a move you make, I think, now. Because to your point, even, you're getting arguably the best version of Zach LaVine right now. This isn't just like Zach LaVine, the, chucker or whatever. Exactly. He's had, he's had that moniker given to him over the years. Like, you're getting a legit guy. And you pair him with Fred, who is, again, you look at his stats, not looking great, but like you got to watch, like with him, you have to watch the games. That guy's just trying to win games, He's just settling down the offense. Like you have those two guys, an emerging Thompson, Şengün's been balling as well. Like it's, again, it all hinges on whether or not you feel like Jalen Green's going to be a future star.
But and at least from Chicago's perspective, like
home run for that.
You know what I mean? If
Yes.
you can turn LaVine into a guy who, for all the flaws I said, he is still a really intriguing, talented player, 22 years old, just about to start his long-term extension. If you're Chicago, you can turn LaVine into a guy like that who can be part of your next good team, could be a foundational piece of a rebuild, and then actually you can kickstart a real rebuild for the first time in years when you've been so reluctant to it. I think it's a win-win for me.
Yeah, I think the Bulls side of it is just like, like we saw the trade they made with Caruso, who may or may not have had, he's rumored to have had all of this insane trade value over the years. But it's like, you like Jalen Green in that trade is a foundational piece for you. But also like what are you doing right now anyway, right? So I do think if they could get anybody even remotely close to somebody with as bright a future as Jalen Green, like I don't even think you think about it if you're the Bulls. It's just an instant. You make that trade right away.
Well, you're welcome, Chicago. You're welcome, Houston. You're welcome, LA. You're welcome, New Orleans, kind of.
A little bit, yeah. You kind of got you got the worst end of all those trades for sure,
as New Orleans often does.
Yeah, true.
All right, this was great.
I had a good time.
2 for 2. We'll see if third time's an unlucky charm. Maybe you'll blow it then.
Oh, great. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
No, honestly, great stuff. We'll definitely have you on again. Maybe talk some trending social things soon enough with you. Until then, for Scott Excellence Campsall, my name is Joseph Casciaro. This has been The Unfiltered Show. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.